Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Trish Regan Show. What was Fox thinking? Really? I mean, what was that whole debate there last night really and truly about? We're going to get into that. Plus, is this Tucker thing for real? Might he really be serious about vice president? And perhaps something even more? We'll discuss. We got some challenges still overseas haunting us, as well as some rather dismal economic numbers. And it turns out the House is not going to honor Marsha Blackburn, the senator from Tennessee's request for a subpoena of Epstein's flight logs. Now, why would that be? We'll get into all of it today. Welcome to the program. It's so good to have you all here. We are sponsored, as always, by the wonderful folks over at Legacy Precious Metals. And it's a very special day because we happen to have the CEO of Legacy Precious Metals, Charles Thorngren, who you guys may know. He's been in the chats often with us. He's come on the program often with us. He's going to talk a little bit about all of this stuff as we get into just exactly what went down there last night. What's going down in our economy? 1-866-589-0560. That is their number. But indeed, you know, some strange stuff because I just get back to this. Why was it necessary for Fox to stoop to that level? I mean, this is the B team really on steroids. Ron DeSantis versus Gavin Newsom. Now, you know, I will say this. Gavin might have a shot of jumping into things as long as Michelle's elbows aren't too pointy. But DeSantis, I mean, he's already behind Nikki Haley, let's face it, in the polls there in New Hampshire. We can get into the reasons why. But before we do, first of all, I just say, Fox News, what were you thinking? Because this gave the left the opportunity to go after conservatives in a way that I don't think was very helpful. Certainly not to DeSantis, who was already struggling, but to the conservative movement in general. Watch this.
Well, I love the rant on freedom. I mean, here's a guy who's criminalizing teachers, criminalizing doctors, criminalizing librarians, and criminalizing women that seek their reproductive care. You're making it harder to vote. You're banning books. I mean, spare me this notion of freedom. Ask the folks at Disney about freedom and free enterprise. Ask the folks at the Special Olympics that you threatened to fine with $27
because they were discriminating against the athletes.
Who goes after
those
Special Olympians
to be
when
out
it comes to
kids
the
with
issue,
Down syndrome.
Ron, of homelessness?
That is wrong. That's being a liberal bully. That's being a bully.
Really?
They had Down syndrome, and you wanted to discriminate against them.
$27 million
they were discriminating against because they were discriminating against the athletes. They wanted to marginalize the athletes, and you wanted the athletes marginalized. That was wrong what you did. These are kids with Down syndrome that just wanted to compete.
I grew up working
you wanted them,
adoption
you wanted them out of the
kids. I've been working with Special Olympians all my life.
You wanted them to be. You wanted them to be ostracized.
You threatened to fine Special Olympians
from Florida.
She got to participate
because we stood up for her rights.
This is the way you treat. By the way, no, hold on.
It's your turn.
No, let me say. I can handle that. I can handle it. I'm used to that. But you know what? Your attacks on the trans community, your attack on the gay and lesbian community.
And here we go.
You attack vulnerable communities. You attack women.
Okay, and so it goes. And so it goes. And the problem here, ladies and gentlemen, is that, well, Ron DeSantis, as I've told you before, is just a lousy politician. He doesn't really necessarily like people all that much. Believe me, he's been on my set. It's awkward just, during the commercial breaks. You compare and contrast that with politicians that are successful, including Newsom, by the way. I mean, I think he's a lousy governor, but he's got that sort of je ne sais quoi on camera, right? It's like we were looking, as one conservative friend said to me, we were looking at like Nixon versus JFK. I mean, that's what comes to mind. Everything. Like, it's just all wrong. I say this right now, forgive me, for those of you that love DeSantis, but almost as a television producer now. Put your television producer hat on. Think about the voice. Think about the lack of charisma. And then you put him up against Gavin Newsom. I mean, let me tell you, that was not a wise move for the Conservative Party. I don't think so. And by the way, not a wise move for Ron DeSantis himself. But probably still good for Tucker and for Trump. We're going to talk about all of that, plus the economy. I am thrilled to welcome back on the program. We have with us my good friend, Charles Thorngren. Charles, it is really good to see you again.
Great to be back. Thank you for having me again.
I want to make sure we're good. We've got your microphone going. You know what? The whole team will tell me if for some reason there's an audio issue. I'm counting on you guys. This is a live program here, a live show, live edition. So watch out. Anyway, I want to get your sense of this. We'll talk about the economy. We'll talk about the inflation in just a second. But, let me play one more clip for you, Charles. This was the one that was sort of a highlight. I'm going to just say ahead of getting into this, I felt like this was beneath a presidential candidate. This is what you let your surrogates do, right? You don't actually pull out a map and try and prove where all the human feces spots are in San Francisco. I mean, it seems sort of, and I get it. It's a bad place now, San Francisco. It was bad when I lived there. It's worse now. But it just felt kind of degrading. I want to get your view. We can talk about just exactly what's going on with DeSantis in a second, or Fox for that matter. I'm waiting on the ratings, which are going to come in any second. But listen to this in the interim.
Well, I'm looking at total time. Governor DeSantis about 2 minutes.
He needs it.
This is a map of San Francisco. There's a lot of plots on that. You may be asking, what is that plotting? Well, this is an app where they plot the human feces that are found on the streets of San Francisco. And you see how almost the whole thing is covered, because that is what has happened in one of the previous greatest cities this country's ever had. Human feces is now a fact of life, except when a communist dictator comes to town. Then they cleaned up the streets. They lined the streets with Chinese flags. They didn't put American flags there. They cleaned everything up. So they're willing to do it for a communist dictator, but they're not willing to do it for their own people.
I want to get in with the limited time we have left. I want to get, there are two very important.
Ouch. So, that was sort of the highlight. That's like the sizzle reel, if you would. And I'm like, wait, great. Like, that's the sizzle reel? I don't think that did Republicans a whole lot of favors. Maybe he could win against Biden, because like anybody could win against Biden, but Ron DeSantis versus Newsom, that's a tougher scenario. And I'm not sure why we're bothering having debates with people who aren't the presidential candidates.
It almost reminds me of days where we used to have vice president debates, right? That's what that felt like to me more than anything. Who's running for the second chair? And unfortunately, DeSantis did not do the Republicans any favors with that debate.
Yeah,
there are other things to talk about than the state of San Francisco. No one is shocked by that.
It's true, but it's like, it's so hard to, I guess it does, charisma matters. I thought that one of Trump's gifts was that he really related to an audience. He genuinely likes his audience, right? Like he thrives off of that energy. I think probably Newsom shares some of that. He's a bit of a showman, for better or for worse, right? I despise his policies, and he's too much of a showman. I don't think he's got a whole lot of substance. But Ron DeSantis, I think it was quite evident, like his political future. And again, I'm sorry for those that that really like him, but when the poop thing is the highlight of the debate, right? Somebody's making the joke in our comments right over here. You're welcome to comment, react. We're talking with Charles Thorngren, our wonderful sponsor here on the show of Legacy Precious Metals, 1-866-589-0560. We will get into the economy in just a bit, but we got to talk news a day. When this is the biggest highlight out of the Fox debate, I feel bad for Fox. I feel bad for DeSantis. I feel bad for conservatives. And I think this actually helped Trump a little bit more. That was my takeaway. Your thoughts?
I agree. And I think, we can't blame Ron. We need to blame his team. You're
generous.
But you can't make somebody more interesting than they are. He's not that guy.
Yeah.
What he is, though, is a governor who fixed a state.
Yes.
There are so many things for him to talk about. He could say, you know what? I'm not as attractive as you, Gavin. But you know what I can do? I can fix the country. You don't need.
That would have been a perfect line.
But this is where he's being mishandled. He doesn't understand where he should be. And like you said, he's not notoriously known to be friendly. But you don't need to be. We're not asking you to be our friend. We're saying, can you handle the big chair? Can you make the decisions that need to be made? And you have experience doing it. To not highlight it, it's worse than shooting yourself in the foot. You just he made himself look very bad.
No, you're right. Like, that would have been such a great line. I know I'm not as handsome as you. It would have been great, because it would have kind of shown some self-deprecation to, that would have been and again, I go back to Trump. There's a great clip where my team's trying to actually pull it right now, because after the debate, one of the reporters at Fox went into a bar or something and said, "Did it change your decision? Who are you going to vote for?" And they went right down the line. They were like, Trump, 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 Trump. So it didn't change anybody's mind. But I think that, that ability to be kind of self-deprecating, I remember the time that he said something about the bulbs and energy policy, and he really couldn't stand these new light bulbs because they made him look so orange. And it was sort of brilliant, right? Because everybody was making fun of him for being orange, and he just owned it. And that's what DeSantis, he takes himself maybe too seriously, or just he's not a natural politician, and not everybody is. And maybe we don't want natural politicians, but we do live in a world of television. And that to me was just kind of a sad night.
And he's had years to practice for the media training.
Yeah.
He's been in the limelight. So they know that he's not going to suddenly be better at that. That's why, again, I'm going to blame his team. I think that he makes himself hard to support. But that's his team's doing. They should have really focused him where he needed to be. Because the reality is, we want the nation fixed. That's what we want.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Whatever it takes to do that. Some would say that President Trump shouldn't be as outspoken as he is, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you're fixing the problem, the personality is put off to the side. You're getting the solution that's wanted. You're willing to put up with some of the other aspects that you may not care about. And that's what we're looking for. Doesn't matter if you're friendly. Talk about fixing the state of Florida.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a great track record. I would give him that for sure. And how many people have told us, they've moved to Florida, they got out of New York, they got out of California, they moved to income tax-free Florida, where the world was open. I remember talking to friends in Florida during the height of COVID, and I live outside the New York City area, and everything was shut down. Everything was shut down. I mean, except for the big box stores, right? Like Home Depot or Walmart. But anyway, everything was shut down. And my friends in Florida were like, "Oh, it's great here. We're going out for a steak dinner tonight." Mm-hmm. And it was like a different world. And he needs to take credit for that and not try and, compete against Gavin in the traditional ways.
And he did it in a very impressive way, too, if you look at it. It wasn't just the snowbirds moving down there.
Right.
It was young working people bringing, money flow to the state, bringing economy to the state. It's so overlooked what he did, and he's not doing the right job getting that out there.
Yeah, I mean, you can blame his team. He had a lot of money at the start, and then I think a lot of the smart money has sort of gravitated to Nikki Haley, and they're sort of begrudgingly looking at the situation saying, "Oh gosh, it's going to be Trump again." They don't know what that means. They're nervous about it. And though we had better economic policy and frankly better foreign policy and at least an effort to try and get the border under control during those times, I mean, there's just this fear factor, right? So they're so afraid of him and what he might mean, I guess, for the country, for their businesses. And that will be played upon by the left. And so as a result, the big money is wait, okay, DeSantis is no longer our guy. But I just look at Fox, which also is not what it once was. I think that's a country music song, but not what it once was. And to stoop to having to go to the B team like that is a little bit surprising to me. And it shows how desperate they are in some ways for ratings, which I don't necessarily think they're going to get. I could be wrong, but we're waiting on those ratings right now. I just want to point out to everyone, this is a live edition of the Trish Regan Show. We're talking with Charles Thorngren, wonderful sponsor of this program from day one. 1-866-589-0560 is the number if you want to talk with Charles. Let me put that on the screen right now. 1-866-589-0560. LegacyPMInvestments.com is the number. But anyway, so Charles, back to some of the chatter about who could potentially be vice president in this race. Because, as you mentioned, that's sort of the big question, right? Who's going to be the number 2 slot? Right now, we know it's Biden, assuming he can make it. And then we know it's Trump, assuming he doesn't have some major legal challenge that turns into a you-know-what show. With that in mind, everybody's like, okay, so who's he going to pick? Who's he going to pick? Who's he going to pick? I want to get your thoughts on Tucker Carlson, because you and I have talked about this off air, and you actually think there's some there. I want to show the viewers what Tucker Carlson, my former colleague over at Fox, I was on at 8, he was on at 8. I was on the business network, he was on the main network. Obviously, super successful guy, now out on his own, sat down with Roseanne Barr, and she asked him directly about whether he would consider the vice presidential spot on the Republican ticket with Trump. Here we go.
First of all, on the crazy train there, how do you feel about Trump saying he would consider you for vice president?
Gosh, I don't know. I put that in the category of asteroids striking the Earth, good or bad. It's so far outside of my control that I'm flattered.
Yeah, it is flattering, isn't it?
For sure. But I mean, it's hard to, I've never been in politics.
Would you ever do it?
Would I accept?
Yeah, if you really asked
think about that. I mean, I spent my whole life looking at politicians and commenting on them and passing judgment on them, and I've never run for, room mother. And so the idea of that is so far from anything I've ever done, it's kind of hard even to imagine.
What do you think?
I certainly support Trump, I'll tell you that. And I can tell you, I've always agreed with Trump's policies, always. And I lost friends over it. And I've never really actively supported anybody because it's not my job to actively support people. I watch,
Right.
I like to watch. But I'm a voyeur.
Yeah.
But I became an active Trump supporter when they raided Mar-a-Lago last summer, the summer of 2022. That can't stand.
No, that can't.
And
that was something.
Agree with Trump on a lot. But even if I disagreed with Trump on a lot, I'd still be a Trump supporter because you cannot allow that. You cannot allow the regime, the president of the United States, to use the Justice Department to knock the front runner out of the race. You can't do that.
No, you can't do that.
You can't do that, she says. And it is very interesting positioning. I mean, he's come under fire, Tucker Carlson has, for maybe not liking Trump so much. Fox released a whole bunch of text messages during the Dominion thing. And so I suspect that was designed a little bit to try and make him less attractive with some of the viewership perhaps that he had. I don't know. I don't want to get into the reasons why they did or why they didn't do what they did. But I would just say this. Do you think that there is a chance, Charles, that Tucker could be the vice president on the ticket?
The big thing I want to point out there is what he didn't do. He did not say no.
Yeah. Hey.
He had asked the question multiple times, and he never once said no.
In fact, he almost doubled down. She was kind of blurry on her question. He's like, wait a second, is this really it? Now, some people would say, oh, it's just a publicity stunt, etc. I have a few different thoughts on this. I would say from the Trump side, and Maggie Haberman, who's well connected in the Trump circle, and I don't know how, because she writes for the New York Times and she's not necessarily that positive. But anyway, she also has said exactly what I said, which is that I think that this is real for Donald Trump. Like, I think Donald Trump would be willing to look at it. I don't know as it would be a match made in heaven because you get two big personalities there. But I think that Donald Trump is smart enough to say, okay, well, this would be a lot of wind in the sails, right? We can really rally people and maybe even rally some people that might not have liked me, maybe because Tucker was said not to like me. I think it's worth Trump looking at. I think Tucker, you and I, we might not see eye to eye on this, but I want to hear your view because my initial thought was, he's too smart for that. We know what it's like, us in the media circle, and most of us get enough sort of incoming being in the media circle. You look at being a politician and say, who needs that? And I think he's well aware of the hits he'd take to himself and his family, although I don't know how many more he can take given what he's been through. So what do you think? It's worth it?
He's taking the hits anyway.
Yeah.
Right. At some point, we have to look at Tucker and say he's not what he was when he started. I have a belief that Tucker's main goal right now is to create a form of justice for Americans, to make sure truth is known, to make sure that he has the ability to point out the hypocrisy where possible. There is no better spot to do that than the vice president of the United States. Ultimate platform, right? smart enough man to help Trump on the decisions that he needs help with. But more importantly, where he fits in so well, President Trump now is no longer doing all the media. If you're going to have a smart, conservative-minded person handling media events for you as the president, who is better? I don't think there's anyone better.
But okay, so this is because you're a nice person. You don't come from the television world, right? But given that I know what I know about the television world, I also know that there's lots of egos. And then in the political world, you get egos as well. So my cautionary note for both of them, by the way, would be, can you guys play well in the sandbox together? And I'm not sure about that. Like, I actually think that Mike Pence, right up until, he wanted no part of January 6th, but he always sort of played second fiddle in a very loyal way to Donald Trump. And they were kind of two peas in a pod there. I remember calling the White House about something and getting both of them on the line. I was talking to the president, and then Mike Pence must have walked into the room and he's like, "Hey, Mike, it's Trish. Trish, say hi to Mike." And long story short, I came away with a sense that they had a very strong camaraderie. And whether or not he would have that with another sort of big ego television star, I don't know. And then I would say, does that set the stage for other kinds of infighting and other problems? I mean, I guess that would be just my worry.
I could see that, but I'm going to look beyond that, because I'll say that Tucker worked in an environment that he was not pleased with for several years before he left.
Yeah.
So he understands what it takes to get what he wants, right?
Yes, yes.
You work with unpleasant people.
Yes.
But I think he and Trump like each other enough for him to really consider it. And the other thing to really think about, too, the easiest way to the real big chair, if Tucker wanted that, would to be the vice president.
Right. Because they think they can take him down.
Who could?
If Trump, because by the way, on either side, let's be perfectly honest here, right? What do you think Kamala's thinking? Well, he may not make it another 4 years. And I suspect that somebody who comes in on the Republican ticket, it might be thinking, not from a health standpoint, I actually don't think he's as, I could be wrong, who knows, right? But maybe as at risk as Biden. But Donald Trump certainly is at risk from a legal standpoint, right? And they could just hammer that away and hammer that away and hammer that away. And then all of a sudden, the vice president finds him or herself as president of the United States of America. So by the way, a reminder, everyone, whoever is on that vice presidential ticket better be darn good.
And I'm going to probably say something here you may want to back away from a little bit. But just everyone know this is my opinion, okay?
Yeah.
To think that something legally could not happen to Trump if he became president is misguided. We have to look and say that there was an effect on the last election by a created event, pandemic, that is just as bad as a legal fight for someone who's sitting in the presidential chair. If you're willing to go that far to affect an election and affect the government of the United States, there is no step that's too great. So even if Trump wins again, it doesn't mean they're not going after him. So that second seat needs to be very, very strong.
Very strong. Yeah. Look, it's hard to Monday morning quarterback, but I will just point out to everyone watching right now, there's a reason I'm not at Fox anymore. And it actually has to do with what I went out on a limb and said, which was my concern about the politicization of March 2020. I think, when, again, I'm a business reporter, so I just try and cut through everything. When I see the market dropping 2,000 points, I'm like, okay, enough already. Like, okay, I realize that this is your missing plane over at CNN, but enough already, because the risk here now is you're going to shut down the whole economy. And by the way, that's what they did the next day. You're going to shut down the whole economy. And frankly, like, if this is as bad as you all say it is, you're going to need a strong economy to fight this thing. And so they kind of just did everything wrong, right? And that, we've been over at nauseam, because you want to protect the people that need to be protected, but you don't want to shut everything down and then start printing money. And the political consequences of that were very severe, certainly for Donald Trump, which gets us into the economy right now. I mean, I saw some numbers this week, Charles, that really suggest consumer spending is pulling back. And this is like Alice in Wonderland, right? Where bad is good and good is bad. So everybody's like, great, the economy's pulling back a little bit, which means the Fed won't have to move again. And yet I was at the store buying eggs the other night, and the cheapest dozen eggs they had was for $7.99. And I'm like, gee, when did eggs go to $8? I mean, I know they've been there for a bit, but just a few years ago, you weren't paying $7.99 for a dozen eggs. Inflation's here. The economy's slowing. Not a good scenario.
No, but it's what we've talked about. This has to happen. At some point, you need to see inflation break. Now, in this scenario, you have two things working for you. Everyone talks about raising the interest rates and how the Fed is fighting inflation through the interest rates, but they're also fighting it through quantitative tightening as well, which most people don't understand, but that's not the repurchase of bonds hitting the market that the Federal Reserve typically buys, as central banks typically buy. So they're reducing money in the float. So what you have is the beginning of what should have happened last year. This is the problem. The effects that we're seeing now, and you're going to start to see people starting to say, it's working, we fixed it. We have a long way to go. Chairman Powell has said it himself. We're beginning to see some traction, but expect this to go on for quite a while. The worst thing that you could have happen is start to sing about the victory that you've made before it's been achieved. You'll then get into a scenario where if we see they begin to lower interest rates, inflation comes back again, it's going to be even harder to manage at that point. So this is where you get into a holding pattern, and money will still be tight. And you take that tightness in the money supply and you add that to the fact that now we will begin to see the growth disappear. We'll begin to see the weakening of the economy. This is what we've talked about. This is that recession that comes, and it has to be managed correctly. And I've not always been a big fan of Chairman Powell, but I think he's going to manage this one correctly. If they say don't expect to see any loosening in the next 7, 8, possibly even a year, that's the correct thing to manage this scenario. You need to make sure we get inflation beat before we begin to loosen up everything else. It's so important because there will be a recession. I know you don't like to talk in absolutes like that, but there will be a recession.
I mean, by the way, you can say that because there will be a recession at some point. Like, it's a cyclical thing. Right. It's just when it hits. And frankly, they've done everything possible to ensure that at some point it's going to hit. And by the way, I worry it's going to hit really, really badly. You see right now this push, this DEI stuff going on. There's a push right now at banks, believe it or not, to be more aggressive on their lending with diversity in mind. Now, the last time that happened, Charles, remember? I believe that was 2000. Well, it would have been 2005 into 2008. That was Barney Frank, who wanted to make sure that we had lots and lots and lots of diversity proponents in the banking industry, and that everybody was getting mortgages. So they had these no income, no asset, known as NINA loans or NINA loan, no income, no asset, and suddenly you get a loan. And instead of actually being capitalists, right, that they're concerned about maybe getting their money back, they were more concerned about the diversity issues that Barney Frank was so keen on. And consequently, eventually the whole mortgage market sort of blew up and the economy was a disaster. I mean, I look at, everything that they're doing, and it's like a political motivation instead of a capitalist motivation. I mean, capitalism works pretty well. And frankly, actually helps with equality, because who the heck cares as long as you're making some money?
If you want diversity and you want, equity and for everyone to be equal, we need people to succeed in a capitalist economy. This is what we have. You can't change the economy structure so that people feel like they're equal. Mm-hmm. So you need to be able to offer the things that help people of diversity succeed in the system that we have. You don't change the system. That makes no sense. That's, it's like changing the school structure, going to a core system where people weren't passing enough. So we're going to lower the expectations. Now everyone's great. Everyone's passing. We're not any smarter, but we have a piece of paper that says we did good based on a test. And that's your issue, because to succeed, you need to be able to work in a capitalist society. For success to be real and to last, you need to be able to work in that society that you have. So when we gave everyone a house, and by the way, we called them na-na loans, as in, nah, you lost all your money, there's no return for you. Because anyone who was funding those loans lost out, and lost out bad. And that scenario was the case in point. You gave people homes, but they were not able to manage those homes. They weren't able to work in the system that we had. So just like anything, if you don't understand the race that you're in, you will lose it. They got a home and they lost it, and we all paid for it.
Yeah.
So the diversity thing, it's misleading, and it's pandering to people who want an excuse for them not being successful.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And then you look at what's going on college campuses right now, where you consider, let me see if I can show you this, Rashida Tlaib going on a hunger strike. Here we go. Sorry, this is covering you, Charles. Let me put this right in the middle. By the way, thank you guys, because forgive me, Charles, this is a live program, and we got a wonderful control room producer starting on Tuesday of next week. And this won't happen again. You're all pointing out the audio level was off on Charles's mic. So we were able to fix that. Yours truly here. So thank you for that. Just thank you to the viewers. They're very good that way. So they let us know when something's not right. We've got his audio, I think, fixed, as you guys are saying. But this is Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib saying 15,000 Palestinians, including 6,000 children, have been killed by the Israeli government. The IDF, of course, disputes that Netanyahu is starving Gaza. I stood in solidarity with elected officials, artists, and advocates on a hunger strike in front of the White House to demand a permanent ceasefire now. So that was last night. And then, of course, we got this news, Charles. Let me play this for you, about Israel having rockets thrown at it, sent at it again, and they were supposed to be in a truce. Remember that?
Now, the IDF saying that Israel has intercepted one rocket that was launched from the Gaza Strip. Joining me now, CNN Chief National Security Correspondent Alex.
So, this is a very delicate situation, obviously, but the IDF is saying that these rockets are being fired in. You've got Rashida out there with her hunger strike and like cast members from Sex and the City that have joined her. And you've got a Democrat Party that I think is clearly being torn apart. I think that Biden is very much at risk as a result of this. And frankly, that puts America at risk, because he's then sitting there saying, oh, got to be careful. Got to make sure I keep the peeps happy. Rashida's not happy. Okay, well then I'm going to abandon my ally of how many years America helped set up Israel. And now we're, let's not forget, shall we say, who started this. And I don't want to OD on this topic, but I'm a little troubled when Rashida's out on the front lawn demanding these hunger strikes. And then simultaneously, you've got more rockets being sent into Israel out of Gaza.
If you look at ceasefires that involved Israel, Israel has never been the one to break the ceasefire. They've never started action when they go in, and they may not agree to a ceasefire right away. They'll do it when it's appropriate. But when that ceasefire breaks, it's not Israel's fault. This is what happens when you try to deal with several nations surrounding you that just don't want you there.
Sure.
And it's not about the West Bank, and it's not about Gaza. It's about wanting the Israeli people to not exist. It's been made very clear. Does the average Palestinian believe that? No. But the people running the country do.
And they've been indoctrinated. And that's the other thing. The average Palestinian kid doesn't even get to see a school book with Israel on the map. What they've done to women's rights. I mean, I'm appalled, and that's one that I can't stand up for, right? Like that really I find extremely troubling. And you may be all about diversity and respect for someone's religion until there comes a point where, human life is really being affected, and how they treat women is a huge problem in sort of that more extreme Muslim religion, which is practiced in Palestine. So I don't think the people have a chance, right? Because they are fed a bunch of garbage from a terrorist organization. And by the way, all of which is supported by Iran. Like Iran, look at the Wall Street Journal right after this happened. October 7th happened within days. I mean, almost within hours, the Wall Street Journal had the news that Iran greenlit this attack. It was very much in Iran's interest, right? Because they were getting forced out of the party, so to speak. All these other nations, from Jordan to Saudi Arabia, were coming on board together with Israel. Iran freaked out. And now, because we have so many people that are so invested in Iran and the former Iran deal that got wiped out by President Trump, well, now I think that we're at risk, the United States of America, and I can't even believe I'm saying this, but we're at risk for not supporting our ally, Israel, the way we should in the here and now.
The way that we promised, too. Let's not forget that. We promised them that support. And for reasons. I mean, it's beneficial to us to have a nation that is allied with us in that region, in a region that notoriously hates the United States. In a reason, let's be honest, the Muslim religion was the whole reason the Marines were even created. We had an entire military group that was created to deal with the pirates, Muslim pirates at the time. So all you Marine veterans out there, we thank you for that. But that's how you came about. This is how long this fight has been going on. So that ally there is important to us and has always been important to us. And we need to understand something and not keep repeating the mistake from the past.
Yeah.
The Middle East is not our friend.
I remember once talking to President Trump about this when we were pulling out of Syria, and I'm like, what's going on? And he said something rather similar, basically. He said, look, this has been going on for thousands and thousands of years. And he was quite adamant. He's like, I don't want to lose any American lives over this. I really don't. Like, he felt very passionately about this. But at the same time, he also recognized that you gotta pay attention, right? And you've got to take a stand when they start doing what they're doing. I mean, you've had a whole bunch of bombs that have been thrown into areas where we have U.S. forces in the Middle East. We reported on this the other day because I think AP finally came out with a story, but you're not hearing about it. It's amazing to me. You're just not hearing about it, and they're really trying to keep it on the down low. Well, Donald Trump, when he was in office, was like, hey, you know what? And he said this on Air Force One. I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but I've given it to you guys before. The viewers may have heard me say this. He basically, and I'm paraphrasing, said, yeah, you think you can do that? Guess what? The UN, everybody thinks that like your religious sites are off limits. They're not. And we will do what we have to do, basically, to protect ourselves. I thought that was, then everybody freaked out. How could he possibly say that? But his point was, hey, how do you think it's okay to come after us and our innocent people and not expect some kind of retribution for that? Bill Ackman, out on Twitter, noted billionaire, hedge fund guy, he said a few things last night about the comedian that I'd actually never heard of. That's neither here nor there, but this comedian was sort of voraciously defending the terrorist organization Hamas. And he writes, quote, "Is this incredible ignorance, conscious avoidance of the truth, or racism? I can't come up with an alternative explanation. A large portion of Hamas supporters on university campuses and elsewhere, like this comedian, are members of the Black community and or people of color. Why? Some have argued that this is due to the diversity, equity, and inclusion movement, which delineates the world in an oppressor/oppressed framework." Very popular in political theory. I mean, Chavez did this beautifully, right? It was the oppressor, the Europeans, the white Europeans versus the people of Venezuela that were there first. So the oppressor-oppressed framework, he writes, in the DEI worldview, Jews are deemed to be white oppressors, even though many Jews, particularly those in Israel, are not white and or don't identify as white. Do you agree with this explanation? For those in the know, why are Jews deemed to be white under DEI despite, he writes, our ethnic diversity? really, he's being very gentle there. He's just bringing up this question, but it's an important question right now because everybody's seeing things through this prism of race as opposed to people for who they are, to the point where I guess now if you're Jewish, you're therefore white, even if you don't identify as white, whatever. I mean, I'm getting kind of confused. There's a lot of different things you can identify nowadays as, but now they are the oppressor. So anybody who is considered the oppressor is bad. And I just think, it doesn't need to be this complicated. Sure, we need to do things to help a lot of people in this country and around the world. I mean, but certainly in this country, there's lots of disenfranchised groups, economically speaking. But at the same time, you can't discriminate against everybody else in that process.
It's interesting to me that we even have this discussion when you look at what Israel has done. They gave up land so that there was an independent state created for the Palestinian people. To blame them for the fact that that nation could not prosper, could not take care of itself, makes no sense. To blame them for not having opportunities makes no sense.
Yeah.
If you come and say, I want to run, I'll use a different example. When my child comes to me and says, I'm going to be independent, I'm going to go get my own house and live on my own, that child is now responsible to manage their household.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I, as a good father, if they need help, will help them. But it's not my responsibility to manage that household. It's the same thing here. You wanted your own state. You decried how bad Israel was by not giving you that own state. You said we can't live together. We as a people cannot live in the same country with each other.
Yeah.
Here's your land. We've done that. And you cannot take care of yourself.
It's true. Yeah, it is a problem. I mean, and we don't have the money for it, frankly. I mean, this is just also, it's going to turn into, I mean, I can't remember the numbers, but they were rather significant, what we're sending over there in humanitarian aid to Gaza. And unfortunately, let's be very clear, even the Palestinian Authority has come out, and you look at their mandate and their charter, and, they're not exactly pro Israel. like that's putting it kindly, right? I think they actually encouraged a whole bunch of mullahs. This was maybe about a month and a half ago, shortly after October 7th happened, to encourage people, to get them riled up. And it was atrocious to me to actually see that, because that's the Palestinian state to which we're giving all this money to. I want to just acknowledge some of the viewers here who are joining us, and we get a lot of familiar faces here. Jeff, good to see you. I love this. He writes, I identify as me. Craig says, I identify as a constitutional patriot. I'm with you, Craig. And Jeff is saying this. Look, I think it's great to Danny joining us. It's really good to have everybody here. So many familiar faces. Leslie, thank you for your comments on the volume earlier on. Stephen, good to see you. He's a Trump fan for sure. It was funny. I was trying to find this video. I'll see if I can get it for you guys later, but there was really something terrific. We've been talking about the debate, of course, and there was a moment where the Fox reporter went out to everybody that was watching the debate in the bar, and they were all conservatives, and they said, okay, so you're going to vote for Ron DeSantis? And people were like, no. And he went down the line. It was like Trump. So, it feels as though we were in a somewhat safer time. I can't tell you how rocky the world feels right now. I know you all know that, and Charles certainly knows that. It's probably one of the reasons why people are buying gold, shall we say, which is important to note, because we are talking with Charles Thorngren. He is one of the great sponsors of this program, has been from the very beginning, legacypminvestments.com. That is where you need to go if you're interested in buying gold or silver, 1-866-589-0560. One of the things I wanted to do, Charles, in this show was sort of open it up to viewers right now and just see if they had any questions, because I think, we talk about gold as one of the ways to hedge inflation. And then people say, well, what if inflation comes down? There's an answer to that, by the way, because even if it does come down, I mean, you still look at what is it up? They shoot for 2%. So you always basically, in however many years' time, wind up spending more for things. The value of your dollar keeps getting eroded. I don't know as we need a Bretton Woods 2.0. I like to joke about it, but it feels like we need some kind of discipline, right? Not necessarily a return to the gold standard, but something that forces some kind of discipline among governments, because we don't have that. They're willing to spend whatever they want to spend, whatever it takes to keep, I don't know, the cronies in power. You look at the mess that we've seen out of the Hunter Biden scenario, right? With all his LLCs and all the money from China and Romania and all these different places, Ukraine. And you start to say, well, what's really going on here? And is my dollar really worth what it should be?
It's an interesting question. And you talk about inflation with it coming down. What does that mean for gold? We have to look at that in the scenario that it is. Our dollar is getting weaker. You and I have talked about this in the past, and we've had conversations, and you say, why is gold going up when the dollar got stronger? Because typically you should do the reverse. We haven't seen that because the problems are so significant that there's more than one driving force moving the price of gold, okay? Even if inflation comes down, the amount of debt that we have as a nation is astronomical.
Yeah.
And that in itself makes our dollar weaker. You need gold. You need gold when inflation's at 2%. It's not okay to say that I'm going to sit here and accept the fact that I lose purchasing power of 2% every year. That's okay with me. To me, I'm not okay with that. And this is why gold should be in your portfolio. And this is why we talk about diversity. You do have an issue where you say, okay, if we're on a gold standard, we have some control over the currency.
Yeah.
There's a problem with that. We don't have enough gold to cover all the dollars.
For sure.
So you look at that. Hi, Leslie. Yes, silver is undervalued. I know.
You saw that. I didn't realize that you could see that. See, we are multitasking. Charles, that is amazing. I thought I was the only one that could do that. So just so the viewers know, I'm looking at all your questions that are coming in real time and all your comments. And I always do. And Charles is here with me. Apparently he does too. So he's been part of this chat with you guys. And I said, feel free to, ask your questions. Please do. Leslie, she's wanting to know your thoughts on silver. We get a few more just on gold and some of the gold prices. But what's your thought on silver for Leslie right now? Because silver, I know you've said in the past, you think it's pretty undervalued. I'm going to see where it's trading at this moment.
It's a little over $25 an ounce.
Yep.
We should
$25.85.
Realistically be about $65 an ounce based on where the gold price is.
Really?
Yes.
What? So then why is it not trading there?
Because it's not people like you and I who are buying up all the metals right now. You have institutions, you have central banks, you have countries, and silver is very hard to store. Right? So
interesting.
If you're creating a backing for the currency that you have, and you have trillions of dollars, you're not going to do silver. Too hard to store, too difficult to accommodate the amount of metals that you need and source it. So gold has always been that standard. Gold has always been what central banks dealt with. Silver was a form of currency. Gold was too, but was more of a backing to currency than it was the actual currency. So when you're backing a nation or a large company or a large fund, you're using gold just for the ease of tradability, the ease of moving it, the ease of storing it.
Okay. And that creates a premium, right? I get it. Not necessarily a premium, but a more sort of direct marketplace, whereas the silver thing is more to consumers, to everyday folks, as opposed to, the central banks of the world. Yeah, or the institutions.
Market where you could have you do have a tremendous amount of gold that gets traded behind the scenes, not even across the bullion desk. It happens party to party. But silver makes so much sense, and at these price points, it makes even more sense, right? If you have the space for it, you should be buying silver.
Okay, I'm looking at gold right now. Gosh, it's nearing 2,100. It's $2,088 an ounce, up 1.5% today. What do you think is fueling that? And I believe we had a question on that, by the way. So let me go back to that question. It's a good one. What's fueling Actually, Daniel writes, it just broke 2066. So Daniel, in the time that you wrote this, well, today anyway, it's 2088. What do you think that's about, Charles?
This is about people in the know realizing that the Fed is not going to reduce interest rates this month, next month, the month after, may not even be until the end of next year. You have a market where, and here's where it gets tricky. I'm going to say some things that the equity market may not like.
Okay, that's okay. I'm not working for a bank. I'm not working for a network. I get a lot. I get away with a lot nowadays. It's kind of nice.
So when you speak about diversity, I know myself and my team, we speak about diversity as having equities, having bonds, having precious metals, making sure you have insurance too. These are all part of the profile, right? An equity person will tell you all you need is stocks. Oh, you're getting close to retiring. Oh, now you should get some bonds. That's all they know. They believe in diversity within their asset class. There is a problem with that. You need diversity in all things. So you have the people in the know realizing that the recession that's to come is going to affect their positions. So you have large institutions that are now going out and starting to buy metals. They're buying gold, and they're doing it in ETF forms, or they're doing it in physical forms and storing it away. As you've done reporting many times, it's interesting whenever there's a mutual fund that's coming close to a reporting process for like a year, and they need to make sure that their numbers look good for the year, things get sold about 3 weeks out, and things get bought after they report. And here we are. Reports for the year have been done. It's time to start doing some backing. They know the equity market is in for some trouble. They know the bond market's in for some trouble now too. Those rates have fallen. So now you start looking and saying, where is this all going? This is institutions, this is banks, and this is countries, governments.
You have a question here from Almsey, who wants to know what you think about nickel for the future, including lithium-ion batteries as well. I mean, what would the future be for lithium in that environment? I know that you guys do primarily gold and silver, but when you look out sort of in the broader universe, electric cars being something that theoretically will continue to be part of our future, are there other metals that, even if you don't transact in them, that you're keeping an eye on, Charles, in light of that?
Yeah, no, lithium absolutely is one of them. I think the biggest problem we're going to have with lithium is the means at which it's mined. Most of the countries that mine lithium, if you ever were to look at how they mine it, you'd be heartbroken.
Oh yeah, it's really bad for the environment.
And there's people
really
standing
bad.
there with shovels, digging it out in their hands.
It's so funny, right? Just for a quick little aside, because as much as you want to go on about EV being so clean, this is great clean energy, it's like, okay, well, you need the lithium, right, to get it. So one, you're more dependent on China because China has most of the lithium, and they buy the lithium mines all around the world, and overseas, and in Afghanistan, by the way, which is a good source of that, and then in South America, and then they go in and they don't care about the environment, right? So those places are being totally destroyed. But I guess, the U.S. will be fine. It's just that you create another, how do we say, the yin and the yang, right? And you have to think about the unintended consequences, to use an economic phrase, of all of these various policies and think them through. And you're right, like lithium is bad for the environment. Yes. But does that put a lid on the price, or does that actually make it more expensive?
No, it doesn't put a lid on the price, because we have a demand there. We have an entire subsection of Americans who believe just because it's battery powered, it's good. They don't even understand how it works. If we went all electric right now, we'd create such a pollution hazard here in the United States. The amount of coal that we would have to start burning, and other forms besides gas, to generate the electricity to supply these batteries to be recharged. We don't have the infrastructure to do it. We would create more pollution if we went totally electric, because we don't have the means to generate the electrical capacity that's needed.
It's an interesting point. Turning again back to the same fellow who has a question, Almsey. who really wants to know. He said more about nickel, I guess, than lithium. Is nickel something that, when you look at the valuation on nickel prices right now, and let me pull that up. I mean, where do you see that? And by the way, we have to be careful because you know what? Charles doesn't have a full crystal ball and I don't have a crystal ball. None of us do. But we can talk, I think, in generalities here on the macroeconomic picture that give us a sense of where things are trading. And he certainly knows better than me in terms of gold and silver. But when you look at, I look at copper right now, up 1.7% today, silver up 0.7%. I'm trying to pull up nickel for us as well. What do you think of nickel?
Nickel's not bad. Here's what you want to realize about it. It's never going to be considered a currency. It's never going to be considered a investment value for a currency replacement. Okay. So it's never going to be considered money. It's going to be considered a commodity. So it's not necessarily bad. But when you look and say that we are now peering into the recession, you'll see some manufacturing processes slow down. So nickel could suffer from that if we're not, and we see this when you look at the manufacturing numbers and heavy equipment numbers. That's all down. They're not overloaded with demand right now. So
it's down significantly. I just want to point this out to everybody. So currently trading around $18,000 per metric ton. Nickel is down by some 42% on the start of January, and apparently challenging some of those chart support levels. If you're a technician that looks at this stuff, I always find it kind of fun, dating all the way back to late 2021. And so, I can understand why some people may say, okay, have we hit rock bottom here? Because 42% is quite a dive in any commodity.
It is. And it's the usefulness of nickel that's taken place in part of that as well. When we do have these things like lithium and rhodium and things like that, it replaces some of your other base metals, right? Okay. So, and the other thing that's challenging.
And there's a surplus, I'm reading, quite a significant surplus. So that'll do it. Yeah, but to your point, there's other, you can interchange. It's like, dare I say, it's like when Bud Light realizes that, hey, Coors Light can be easily traded, right? If there's a substitute, then people might use that if the price gets too high.
Yep. And the other thing that would, for me, be a limiting factor for a nickel, even if it's suddenly turned around, is you do buy it by the metric ton. I don't think I could get away with asking my wife to find some space in the garage for a metric ton of nickel.
You want to talk about storage issues, right? When the lithium outlives its uselessness, can it be recycled? Writes Craig. I don't know if you know the answer to that. Don't mean to put you on the spot too much, but
not effectively. And this is why we send it over to China. They don't mind polluting their nation. They have a very large landmass, and some of it is not really inhabited. They don't mind that. So there's some recycling that can be done. It's not quite as effective. When lithium is done, it's kind of done. You can recycle anything if you try hard enough. It's just a matter of whether it's cost effective enough to do so. And that's going to be your issue. It's not really cost effective enough to do so.
I'm just saying, Tim totally agrees with you. The windmill production, by the time it's all said and done, you're consuming more energy, it's more expensive, and then you're going to have the environmental concerns. And Don, a loyal viewer here, Don, good to see you again, encouraging everybody to hit the like buttons. Going back to some of these questions, because there's a nice little debate going here online, and people are talking a lot about this lithium thing and tides that are the most reliable power source. MJ saying, these are all, when we look at commodities in general, I think one thing that's really interesting about gold, about oil, about all these things, and gold is certainly special unto itself because of reasons we've defined earlier with central banks, et cetera, but they're all priced in dollars. Right? So how does that affect the price of some of these commodities? Let's think this one through, right? We'll go back to Econ 101. When you got a lot of dollars And we got a lot of dollars still out there. And I think for the foreseeable future, I mean, what are we looking at? $33 trillion and counting on our debt loads. That's why everybody keeps, remembering Rome on a regular basis. When you think of that debt load, Charles, and you think about the printing of money and all those dollars, what does that mean for gold prices and silver and anything else that's priced, oil, in dollars?
Here's the reality of gold right now and silver. Yes, it's priced in dollars here, but it wouldn't even matter. It's purchased around the world. And we're talking about an issue that it's not just America having. Europe, Asia, they're all moving into recession mode. They're all having monetary issues. So that's one important thing. The other really important thing to realize is that, we're sitting here almost at $2,100 an ounce. And I know that you and I talked at the beginning of the year, and we kind of discussed that. And I said, I think we're going to get close to that $2,100 an ounce. And you said, really, we're at, just over 1,600.
Yeah.
I don't make up numbers, and it's very hard to be accurate on this, folks. So if I'm a little
But you've
off,
been. And by the way, I got to just point out that you called that regional bank crisis before it happened too. Just saying. Might have been, I want to say like 7 months before. It was pretty amazing, actually, Charles.
I'm usually the guy that's early to the party, and I'm okay with that. I'd rather be 6 months early than a day late. That's just kind of the way I roll. But you look at these scenarios, and you can find a lot of information to make these evaluations if you're willing to be honest with yourself and put your beliefs aside. And I know that sounds funny from a person who's saying you should buy gold and silver. I sell it, so you should buy it. But I still look at it with an objective eye, because I'm a long-term believer in holding metals. For me, if it loses value, it's a buying opportunity.
Yes.
Someone who has it and has a fair amount of it, I add when it gets cheaper. But I'll also add when I know it's getting ready to move up significantly. And there's ways to see that. Money, the amount of money being printed, is one of the most accurate measures of how much metals are going to move. The dollar and gold are on a seesaw. The more dollars you print, the higher gold gets in value, because it's like anything else. Our economy is one thing. The amount of dollars you print doesn't change the economy. It changes the value of that dollar.
Yeah.
Just like a stock. When you go and turn around and you release more shares of stock.
Exactly. You're giving away more of the company, and
you're just making each share weaker. And that's what the dollar is.
Yeah,
and gold is the counterbalance to that. So we could do fancy math, and I do like to do it sometimes. I'll put a lab coat on and pretend I'm smarter than I am. I'll get a whiteboard out. But the basics of it is simple. Until we learn to not spend money we don't have as a nation, our dollar will get weaker.
So Stephen has a good question. I hear you. He wants to know how the BRIC countries are using the gold standard to affect the dollar. I mean, did you see recently the guy down in Argentina who's quite a trip, who won? Yeah. And by the way, I used to trade Argentine debt. That was my first, I was on the emerging markets desk at Goldman, and I was an analyst there. We were trading Argentina, Venezuela, Brazil, Mexico. And one of the great problems with Argentina, of course, as you well know, is inflation. And the inflation is so outrageous there now that this guy has come along and he's like promising to get rid of the central bank. And people are like, heck yeah. So I believe they're going to try and be a dollarized economy. But I think it's an interesting question Stephen has. I'll put it back up there. That how do the BRIC countries using the gold standard, how does that affect the dollar? I guess they need to buy more gold, if they're using the gold standard. I don't know as all of them formally do, but informally they certainly do.
And I love the question, Stephen. Great question. And people gloss over it all the time. I'm not going to do that for you. I'll dig into it for you. every nation there that is in the BRIC nations use the gold standard as a threat. What they really want is the US dollar not to be the world currency. That's what the BRIC nations create, and why they were created was to lose the power the US had over other countries. And if you look at everyone who's in the BRIC nations, the founding members, they weren't always necessarily allies of the United States. So this was done so that they could balance out economic powers. Okay. Now, the thing about it was also smart. Gold was cheap when they first started. They were able to pick it up, store it away, put it in vaults, and it created economic wealth for them. But every one of those nations that's one of the founders of the BRIC nation has a benefit by the US not being the world's economy, by not being the world's monetary policy, to not be the dollar in charge of everything.
Well, what do they want then? I mean, you don't want China.
They want a basket of currency. No, they want China.
They want a basket of currencies. Okay.
Yeah. They want diversity, since we're using that word so much.
Yeah. Yes. I gotcha. Listen, we don't want that but we may wind up there. I mean, honestly, if we don't get our act together. Well, and I don't see, and you know Newt really well, and Newt's talked a lot about this. There's no willingness like there once was, right? And Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton were able to come together. They were able to balance the budget. And you look at where we are now versus then, and the velocity of that growth in our debt level is actually pretty darn terrifying. And with higher interest rates, and look, they're higher now. They're not as high as they were, I think, last month when I talked to you, but they're still upwards of, 4%. I would assume they're on the 10-year yield. I mean, these interest rates are not going to be, we're 4.23% right now. So there is an expectation, I think, by the markets that somehow the Fed has this under control. And I'm like, yeah, good luck. I mean, they're not going to raise going into an election year, right? They don't want to screw up Biden any more than he's screwed up himself.
And they can't lower. That's the dilemma.
Yeah.
So that's where those markets are wrong. I know we're kind of jumping around a little bit.
Yeah, I do that.
Those bond rates, those bond people are expecting interest rates to come down. It's not going to happen. I believe you'll see a reversal in that yield on those bonds as well.
Oh, we're having all kinds. You guys are like big thinkers today. Why isn't safe nuclear being encouraged? I want to tell you guys, I judged Miss America last year. And the girl I had a hand in picking, thank you very much, is a nuclear engineer. And she's all about nuclear energy. I think, part of the reasons is everybody's freaked out. Everybody's scared. There's a lot of corporate interest one way or another. And they've kind of squelched it, but I agree with you. It should be discussed, VK. Very, very good point. Don's reminding me here, it's 34.6 trillion. So it was just, like 6 months ago, it was 33. Don, we got to keep up, right? Because that debt keeps growing. Everybody's asking, David, yes, I am going to start on Tuesday, 1:00 daily. 1:00 daily. My team's committed. We're going to be here every day for you live at 1 p.m. So mark your calendars. You don't have to wait around for me to tell you when we're going to be live, although I would encourage you to subscribe to the channel. I want to remind you that we're talking with Charles Thorngren. Charles, I won't keep you all day, but I get a couple more questions from viewers I want to squeeze in. Legacy PM Investments. That is the company that Charles is the founder of. LegacyPMInvestments.com, 1-866-589-0560 in case you want to buy gold or silver yourself. I believe it was David, although let me go back and look here. Somebody had a question on the markup in gold, right? Because there's going to be a markup, obviously. It's like anything else. And so even though the commodity may be trading here, what does that mean for me if I go and call your team, or if I go to your website and I buy gold there? What is the transaction cost like? And how do you differentiate yourself, I guess, from other transaction costs? And also via, say, like an ETF, which, by the way, guys, is not the real thing. Sometimes you can get like an ETF that has like a quasi-real, but I'll let Charles explain that. So what is the markup like?
Great question. The first thing to know that we are the most cost-effective gold company there is that I'm aware of. Any other name that you've heard of, they're charging exponentially more than we are when it comes to what it costs. And I know you're used to hearing that. You think this is a sales technique or something. We are between 7 and 10%, depending on the product. Never more.
Okay. So that's about David was asking, like, he thought it might be around 8%, and you're saying 7 to 10. So that it sounds like it's relatively within ballpark.
Sometimes people want an item that, it's not as easy to get. So it costs us a little bit more to get it. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to tell you, listen, I in the industry, I know a lot of people, but I don't know how many friends I have. In this industry, you will pay sometimes 30, 35% premiums. There's companies out there that you see the ads for them talking about 30, 35%, some of them even more. And to me, that's a shame, right? It's not necessary, but this is why Legacy's here, so that we can help you with your legacy and make sure it's fair for everybody. So
So what's the difference between like actually buying it? Because I know that with you guys, it's actually kind of neat. I've been on your website, and it's neat because you can buy the silver coins, you can buy the gold coins. You can actually also get a vault. So if you want a vault in Switzerland or Texas or Utah, this is where you need to go. And you can rent this vault space, and you can go online and check your gold and where it is in its vault. I think that's kind of cool and kind of interesting. But that's very different than, say, having an ETF, right? The exchange traded fund in gold, which is trying to mirror the price of gold.
Right. And here's your first thing. When you look at an ETF, your first indication that it's not the real thing is that you're not paying $2,065 an ounce for gold. If that's what physical gold is trading for, how does an ETF cheaper? That's the first thing that should bring a question to your mind. Okay. When you buy an ETF, you're buying a portion of the amount of gold that you're trading in. So, right, it's not a 1-for-1, ounce-for-ounce scenario. And sometimes you're not even buying gold. You're buying contracts for gold. You're doing electronic trading. It's completely different, and it's not really based on gold at all. It's based on the valuations of their trading platform. So there'll come a day where if you have an ETF, and it's starting to be exposed now, whenever you see big runs in metals like this, you don't see that same correlation move in an ETF that you do in the physical metals. Mm-hmm. If you're day trading, go ahead and do it. If you want to day trade gold, I wouldn't recommend it, but everyone does different things. If you're going to day trade or short-term trade gold, buy the ETF. That's fine, right? You're looking for a percentage return. You're not looking for the metals for the long term. That's great. Just know that it costs differently. And also in that ETF, there's fee structures in there that you'll never figure out. It's basically a mutual fund. Mm-hmm. And if you want to do troubling math, try to figure out how much the mutual fund you have is charging you every year. It's almost impossible.
Yeah, no, I feel pretty passionately about that. I'll just full disclosure. I mean, the mutual fund industry is an industry onto itself, right? And everybody's trying to make a buck. And one of the things that annoys me the most about the mutual fund industry is all they care about, I kid you not, all they care about is beating the darn S&P. And I'm like, well, why am I paying you that? Like, I'm sorry, but like, I'm not going to pay those lofty fees just so you can try to beat the S&P and you don't care. Like, you're just like, oh, well, the S&P was down 10% last year, but we were only down 9%. Who the heck cares? You still lost me money, guys. Right. So the industry itself has some issues on that front. And, if you're trying to like trade equities, you either, in my opinion, you either do the research, you figure out what your best opportunities are, and you go after those specific companies, and you kind of find your own mutual fund effectively, right? Because then you're not having to pay somebody else to do that, who, by the way, doesn't care as long as they beat the S&P. Because I think individuals would say, well, wait a second, you're still down 8% or 9%. I don't really care. But there's a lot of different ways to think about it. I mean, you can do inflation protected investments, which is, where I think something like gold fits in, and there's other vehicles in which to do that. You can also look at ETFs for equities, because at least, if you're buying, say, spiders, which are, SPDRs, then you're buying the index in the S&P 500 and you're not paying massive fees to some mutual fund manager who maybe will, be 1% or 2% better than the S&P. So a lot of this is, I realize it's complicated stuff, but, people need to kind of take some ownership of their own financial future, because I don't think we're going to count on Joe Biden and company to do it. I think especially a lot of people in America don't really matter in the way that we should to the political class, right? And so we're kind of irrelevant, and it means all the more, I think, that we need to be thoughtful about our financial futures. Look, everybody is really appreciative of all of your information. Dawn brings up something really good. We talked about this in yesterday's show. I'd like to play it for you. We can sort of segue into a little something different. Again, I'll let you, because I'll talk with the viewers a little bit one-on-one too today, but I would like to get your thoughts on this, because I just thought this was fantastic. It was Elon Musk talking to the New York Times reporter who works for CNBC as well. And this was just hysterical. I hope I can play this, because full disclosure, there's some choice words here from Elon Musk. And by the way, I should point out, Charles is the sponsor of this show. So you know what? I can say, I don't have to worry about this, but Elon has to worry about Disney and Apple. Here we go.
Obviously, that there's a public perception that, and you're clarifying this now, but there's a public perception that was part of a apology tour, if you will. That this had been said online. There was all of the criticism. There was advertisers leaving. We talked to Bob Iger today.
I hope they stop.
You hope?
Don't advertise.
You don't want them to advertise?
No.
What do you mean?
If somebody's going to try to blackmail me with advertising, blackmail me with money, go fuck yourself.
But
it gets worse, guys. It gets worse. Yourself. Okay, cover your ears.
Is that fair? I hope it is. Hey, Bob, if you're in the audience.
Well, let me ask you then.
That's how I feel. Don't advertise.
How do you think then about the economics of X? If part of the underlying model, at least today, and maybe it needs to shift, maybe the answer is it needs to shift away from advertising. If you believe that this is the one part of your business where you will be beholden to those who have this view, what do you do?
Why?
I understand that, but there's a reality too, right?
Yes. No.
I mean, Linda Yaccarino's right here, and she's got to sell advertising.
Absolutely. So,
this is interesting what he says.
No, actually, what this advertising boycott is going to do, it's going to kill the company.
And do you think that
and the whole world will know that those advertisers killed the company, and we will document it in great detail.
But those advertisers, I imagine, are going to say, we didn't kill the company.
Oh yeah.
They're going to say,
tell it to Earth.
But they're going to say, Elon, that you killed the company because you said these things, and that they were inappropriate things, and that they didn't feel comfortable on the platform, right? That's what they're going to say.
And let's see how Earth responds to that.
Wow. I mean, so this was quite interesting. Look, I love the guy. I think that he's brilliant. He's not perfect. Nobody is, right? But he's certainly willing to go where other people in the quote unquote establishment just would never dream of going. And by the way, for all our talk of EV and maybe it's not the future, look, the left wants it to be the future. He's the guy that created it all, but they won't have anything to do with him because he's like Mr. Non-Union. I mean, it shows you how embedded so many interests are. But Elon Musk just taken everybody by storm there. Just incredible. What's your thought on Elon? I worry that Twitter might not be. He made that very clear. Although, in a way, was that sort of a threat? I wonder, was that hey, everybody don't buy Disney products, don't go to Disney theme shows. How would you interpret that?
Well, there's two things to look at. X has been about free speech. Mm-hmm. Free speech. So if you don't like what somebody said, too bad. You're on a platform for free speech. Say what you want. If you don't like that individual, mm-hmm. don't follow him. Don't listen to him. I don't know when the world forgot how to turn the power off on something when they heard something they didn't like. If I hear something I don't like, I turn it off. If I don't agree with it, I turn it off. If I agree with it, I'll support it. But if someone else agrees with it and I don't feel like they need to be having any influence in what I'm doing.
Right.
So from that aspect, it makes no sense when you have a platform that's meant there for speech. Yeah. Secondly, he isn't beholden to his advertisers. You aren't beholden to your advertisers. I'm not beholden. I don't have the ability to control somebody that I advertise with. Yeah. If I like what they put out, if I agree with them, I'll advertise with them. If I don't, my money will go someplace else.
Yeah, and that's called free market capitalism, by the way. That's free market capitalism, which no one seems to care about these days. No one seems to value. Kissinger just died. A realist, if there ever was one. And I was telling the viewers yesterday, I first heard him speak as a student. I was living at International House where I couldn't afford the room with the sink. It was like $500 for a room, $550 for the room with the sink. And I'm like, I have to get the one with no sink, right? Like very different time in my life, but an important time in my life. And Kissinger, I remember, came and spoke to a group of us students there. And I thought, wow, this is pretty amazing that this guy's bothering to spend any time with us. And yet it was because he understood, as a realist, as he was, that we were the future, indeed. I mean, this was a long time ago. I was a kid. It was like 1997. But, I think that realism is something that it goes hand in hand with capitalism. And so while capitalism isn't perfect, and realism isn't perfect either, these are things that sure as heck beat the alternative. Absolutely. Because you go anywhere in the world, right, Charles? Everywhere you go, there's no one that's been able to do it like us. And we still are the freest nation on earth, although sometimes it doesn't feel that way. We still are. And we can't squander that.
And that's an important point. I know we were talking earlier about Rashida. I don't necessarily agree with anything she says. She has the right to say it. I'm a former military member. I spent my time, I served the country, and I'll defend anyone's right to say whatever they want. But it's interesting that her position is not something that she could stand on had she been in the country that she's trying to protect, per se. She would not be able to do any of the things that she's doing right now if she were in Palestine, if she were in the West Bank, if she were in Gaza. So we have to remember that too. And as being the leader of thought and freedom, we have to understand ourselves sometimes that people are going to have an opinion that we don't agree with, and it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
when we
lose that ability, this is where conflict comes from. So you look at these things, and, I watched a lot of that interview, and it's interesting what Elon said after the fact too. He said, you don't like me? That's okay. There's another company that's willing to buy those advertising spots. And I may just sell them to them at half the price just to spite you.
Yeah. No, well, there's a lot of, it's very interesting because there's a lot of conservative companies. We had actually one of the folks that's investing in Tucker Carlson's media company on the program just the other day. It's Malik Omid that's running it, along with the gentleman who founded American Greatness, AmericanGreatness.com. And I know both these guys really well. And they're looking at it both from an ideological perspective in that they really want to see conservative thought succeed, but also they're looking at it from a capitalist perspective that if enough of these people are just dropping out, if you're cutting off half the country, right, because you don't agree with half the country, well, half the country at some point might say, you know what, we matter. And we're going to do whatever we can to create our own sort of infrastructure, if you would, to facilitate the economic success of this half of the country. And one of the things I was really struck by is the similarities or the sort of analogy that you can make with a lot of immigrant communities, even the Black community in sort of the post-Civil War era. I'm not suggesting in any way, shape, or form before anybody, that segregation was in any way good. But they did what they had to do, right? In other words, they said, you don't want us at your schools? Well, guess what? We're going to go create our own colleges. And I look at everything that's happening right now. You don't want us at Harvard? Guess what? University of Florida is looking awfully darn good these days, right? For especially, if you're Jewish in this country, I think you're really starting to rethink some of these Ivy Leagues. And so the opportunity from a media perspective, from Twitter's perspective, you're right. Like maybe the price gets reduced, Charles, on Twitter, and then more companies can advertise there. More people see it. And guess what? Those products get bought. And you're starting to build an infrastructure that's an alternative to the ESG, woke nonsense, DEI, CRT community that really doesn't value the American capitalist meritocracy values that have built this country and that we hold dear.
Absolutely. That is the ultimate explanation of the free market.
Yeah, well, I like free markets. I think I put at the top of my YouTube channel, red-blooded free market capitalist. I mean, that's me in a nutshell. Anyway, I've got more to chat with about the viewers, but we are so thankful for your time as always. We're so thankful for your sponsorship. I am actually going to put the link in here in the notes. See, guys, this is a live show. I have to, I don't know if I can type and talk at the same time. So Charles, I'll let you just sort of pick it up with maybe where your thoughts are on gold as we head into the end of the year while I just get this information out.
If you have no gold in your portfolio, you need to call us. If you don't know how your portfolio is performing or how you're going to retire on it, you need to call us. If you have questions, if it's right for you, call us. It's as simple as that. My team here, we are not a pressure organization. We're going to answer your questions and help you decide if it's right for you. And I think with everything that's going on, it makes sense and that you kind of owe it to yourself to at least give us a call and see what could work for you. If it doesn't work for you, great. At least now you know. Yeah. It's important to know for a fact whether you should be doing it or not. You owe yourself that. Give us a call. Holiday season's coming up, right? Things slow down a little bit.
I actually, I think I need to get a silver coin from my son. I got a little guy who loves your site, by the way. He's like always on there. He used my log. He got my log and I'm like, no. You're like, be careful because some of those some of those things are pretty darn expensive, right? Anyway, Charles, so Craig, you know what? He said, I can't afford gold. Silver, right? That's what I said to my son. I'm like, focus on the silver, honey. Anyway, it's really good.
A lot of people don't realize if you have an IRA account right now someplace, you can use that. It can be converted. True. So even if you don't have necessarily cash in your pocket, there may still be options. Call and find out. Yeah. That's the most important thing you can do.
Thank you. Leslie's bought gold from you guys. She loves you. So it might have been silver. I don't want to put words in her mouth. I know that she's interacted with you guys. Listen, it's great to see you. We're going to continue the show here because there's some comments. Actually, somebody said something about CNBC and the reporter and sort of his shock that Elon would say what he said, and sort of kind of implied, well, listen, buddy, you're working at CNBC and New York Times. I guess you can't really say the truth, right? Anyway, I want to get into that and a little bit more Fox stuff as well as some Hillary Clinton stuff. But thank you so much, Charles. We appreciate all your time today. We really appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure as always. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, again, Charles Thorngren, everyone, 1-866-589-0560. All right, so back to some of the things that we were discussing earlier, and it had to do with, do we really have to play this again? We do, because when the biggest highlight out of the Fox big debate, which, by the way, was the B-team debate, is this, well, you got to wonder why they had it to begin with. I mean, by the way, not that DeSantis is wrong on this. It's just that kind of is being known as the
Well, I'm looking at total time. Governor DeSantis about 2 minutes.
He needs it.
This is a map of San Francisco. There's a lot of plots on that. You may be asking, what is that plotting? Well, this is an app where they plot the human feces that are found on the streets of San Francisco. And you see how almost the whole thing is covered, because that is what has happened in one of the previous greatest cities this country's ever had. Human feces is now a fact of life, except when a communist dictator comes to town. Then they cleaned up the streets. They lined the streets with Chinese flags. They didn't put American flags there. They cleaned everything up. So they're willing to do it for a communist dictator, but they're not willing to do it for their own people.
I want to get in with the limited time we have left. I want to get, there are two very important.
Yeah. All right. So that was pretty much something. We're waiting right now on the ratings, which are going to come out any minute now to see whether or not Fox won anything from this. I'm sure they had a good night. I think there was a decent amount of people that were curious enough to tune in. But did it change anybody's mind? I think the risk here is that for conservatives, and certainly for DeSantis, it wasn't what I would call a great showing. I mean, the comparison has been made, and I think it's a fair point, of the JFK versus Nixon debates. And that's in part because DeSantis, you know, God bless him. He's willing to get in there and dig in and run for president. So you got to appreciate that. But he's not a natural politician, and it doesn't come easily to him. And I think that Gavin Newsom, for all his shortcomings, and there are many, specifically as it comes to governing, and maybe this says something about us, right, as a society, when somebody can get on TV and kind of look better and be the shinier, prettier object, that's kind of a problem perhaps with us. But I think the problem here for conservatives overall is that Gavin actually did a fairly decent job, and you run the risk that DeSantis seemed kind of mean. And so then, you know, you're doubling down on this stereotype, if you would, of conservatives. And I got to tell you, conservatives are the nicest people I've ever met. Like, I really think that there's something so genuine and so authentic about all the conservatives I've known. And so it's not ideal, right, for us to be dealing with that. But anyway, it is what it is. And the media's kind of won that war. And I question whether Fox is in that war in a way that's not representing the values of true conservatives anymore. And they're representing the values of media interests, right? Because it's big business like anything else. And you don't have the same kind of involvement and management team that you had there in the past, including Rupert, right? Rupert's kind of checked out, and his son, I guess, is now in charge. And if they don't have the same kind of conviction, and it's all about the almighty dollar, then what are they really standing for? I mean, Elon Musk may actually represent in some ways, and what he tweeted, he apologized for. He said it was very sort of misguided of him. It was sort of flip what he was saying. And, you know, I think he regrets that. But nonetheless, what's interesting about what he's saying is that, you know, we really need to give actual free speech, and people have to be able to have opinions and not get shut down by the likes of big advertisers. Because if the big advertisers shut down speech, then what are you really left with? I want to play the sound again for you. And one of you guys actually, let's see if I can go back and find the comment. You were making a very good point in terms of suggesting that if the reporter on stage who works for the New York Times and CNBC is so shocked that, you know, you have to toe the party line for your advertisers, then what's that reporter thinking, right? Here we go. Elon Musk.
Obviously, you know that there's a public perception that, and you're clarifying this now, but there's a public perception that that was part of a apology tour, if you will. That this had been said online. There was all of the criticism. There was advertisers leaving. We talked to Bob Iger today.
I hope they stop.
You hope?
Don't advertise.
Okay. Then he says a few things. I'm actually muting it right now because I might be breaking the rules by actually playing what he really said, but I'm just going to paraphrase, and then we're going to go back to it because he says it again without actually saying it, but he basically says, go F yourself. Bob Iger, go F yourself. This is the CEO of Disney.
Hey, Bob, if you're in the audience.
Well, let me ask you then.
That's how I feel. Don't advertise.
How do you think then about the economics of X? If if part of the underlying model, at least today, and maybe it needs to shift, maybe the answer is it needs to shift away from advertising. If you believe that this is the one part of your business where you will be beholden to those who have this view, what do you do?
F-Y.
I understand that, but there's a reality too, right?
Yes. No.
I mean, Linda Yaccarino's right here, and she's got to sell advertising.
Linda is the head of advertising.
Totally. No. Actually, what this advertising boycott is going to do, it's going to kill the company.
And do you think
and the whole world will know that those advertisers killed the company, and we will document it in great detail.
But those advertisers, I imagine, are going to say, we didn't kill the company.
Oh yeah.
They're going to say,
tell it to Earth.
But they're going to say, Elon, that you killed the company because you said these things, and that they were inappropriate things, and that they didn't feel comfortable on the platform, right? That's what they're going to say.
And let's see how Earth responds to that.
Yeah. So again, I was trying to find it. I did see, I think I put it up earlier on the screen, one of you making the point that, heck, if you can't actually say your opinion freely because you're so worried about advertising, and this particular reporter is so worried about that, then what does that say about the organizations he has worked for? And I worked for one of them for many years, CNBC. And I would say, look, you know what? These are big corporations, networks, and there is a spontaneity and an authenticity and a roughness to what we're doing here. By the way, reminder to please subscribe, everyone. A roughness. I point out that at the beginning of the show, you had to remind me that our audio levels were a little off with the guests. Anyway, a lot of that, by the way, I just want to subscribe because we've got a live show starting on Tuesday at 1:00 every day. I'll be here tomorrow. I'll be here on Monday. But on Tuesday, we are going to start 1 p.m. live every day from 1 to 2. So make sure you sign up, you subscribe. Leslie making the point that she did not get the live notification from yesterday. So we'll make sure that you do, Leslie. Thank you for that. Thank you for that heads up. But anyway, yes, subscribe to the channel. We're live on Facebook. We're live on YouTube. We'll be live on Rumble as well. And it's important because there's a lot to talk about. And yeah, I don't have any strings attached, right? Like, so this is a very different place. It's a very different medium. And I like it because we're connected. I mean, you may have to see me look off screen to read your comments, but I'm reading your comments, right? What time zone? Pat, thank you for asking. It will be Eastern time. So 1:00 East Coast time. 1 to 2 o'clock daily, officially beginning there on Tuesday. Don, my good friend, that he has become such a champion of the channel, 167,000. That's right. We are actually growing it's tremendous. It's wonderful. And it's thanks to all of you guys. So thank you for that. Pat, again, 1 p.m. I'm going to write it down, Eastern time. Okay, so that is when we are going to be on. So thank you guys for being with me and so supportive. And yes, David, it's super cool. I am glad that you enjoyed today's show. I'm glad that you enjoyed talking to Charles. He, I think, has a lot of really interesting insight. And I like that you are here and that we continue to get to have these opportunities. So thank you so much. I want you to have a wonderful weekend. I'll check in. We'll have some clips and things like that over the weekend for you. Do your part, whatever you can, to share them, to like them, to get the word out there so that people know about us. This is being built literally one subscriber at a time. No marketing money. This is all organic. So I am counting on all of you and I thank you. And we will pick up the show again Monday and probably around 1 p.m., but for sure, Tuesday, 1 p.m. every day, Monday through Friday. I look forward to seeing you guys then. Set your alarms, set your calendars, Eastern time. Have a great weekend.